Welcome to the Atlantic Current. I'm Vince Martin from Wall Street, Maine, here with Tull McAdoo from the Irish Politics newsletter. We are wrapping up another news-packed, if dismal, week in American and European politics, Tull. According to reports from Politico Europe, the foreign policy chief of the European Union privately told lawmakers this week that the state of the world meant it, quote, might be a good moment to start drinking.
Yes, and I don't think she's wrong. And
No, she's not.
We have a massive amount of geopolitical tension all over the world. It's resembling something akin to the Cold War for those of you listening that are old enough to remember. Yeah. So the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, she was Estonia's first female prime minister from 2021, to 2025, I think. She's a smart lady. She knows what she's talking about. And I think it coincided with what was going on with the meeting with Denmark and the USA in Washington yesterday and today. I think the foreign minister of Greenland was there as well. And they're saying that the discussion was frank and open and honest. And, you know, nobody knows exactly what that means. But the Greenland foreign minister, the Denmark foreign minister, were seen smoking outside the White House.
Jeez.
There's a video doing the rounds of social media, like, you know, that very famous Ben Affleck meme.
Right.
Standing outside the door having a cigarette.
Being exhausted by the world. Yeah. I sympathize. This will be going out on Friday, so maybe Friday night here is a cigarette outside and then a Guinness inside.
There was a line from the Danish Foreign Affairs Minister. He says, "You trade with people, you do not trade people." And I think that's quite telling. Yeah. That's one for the history books, that line, I think.
Well, it depends on how the history plays out, right? If Greenland and Denmark can stand up to what's starting to look like the evil empire, then yeah, that's one that might sort of echo down the decades as really getting to the heart of the debate, of the argument here.
So talks are going really badly. And, you know, Trump said with a straight face during the week also that Denmark can't claim Greenland just because they had a boat land there 500 years ago. So there was an awkward silence in Europe when he said that. Everybody was kind of looking at each other going, whoa, what? Is Donald Trump going to give the United States of America back to the Native Indians, do you think?
I'm sure he could find a way to argue that that doesn't apply, even though the hypocrisy there does seem pretty thick.
Yeah, I mean, the Danish foreign minister also said it's clear the president has a wish to conquer Greenland.
Right.
For me, listening to that, it's harking back to, 19th century colonialism or something.
It's more personal than that. He actually said, we talked about the New York Times interview he did after the capture of Maduro in Venezuela. And in that interview, he said, we need to own it, for success. And they asked him, is that for the success of this country or for the success of you? And he basically said, no, it's for me.
Yeah, and I think it's escalated to such an extent now that the EU are actually sending troops to Greenland.
Yeah.
I don't know, is that coming across on the news over in the United States, is it?
It has, yeah. I mean, it's been a little bit buried. Greenland has kind of gone from front burner to back to front to back, based on a lot of the stuff that we have going on here. But yeah, I have seen those reports.
And the EU has given it a great name. Reminds me of Desert Storm. Back in the 90s, they called it Operation Arctic Endurance.
Yeah. Not much creativity there.
There's another thing here is that Greenland's 60,000 people living in it. Okay? So,
right.
And you see the reports of the USA trying to buy Greenland from Denmark. And these people, they're 60,000, and for the most part, they're indigenous people. Okay? And 85% of them, the recent polling says that they don't want to join the United States.
Right.
Question is, for me, kind of fundamentally, is can 57,000 people be sold as property?
Yeah, that's a dark way to look at it, but that seems to be where the American side of the negotiation is trying to go.
And there was polling done by CNN, I read today, that 75% of Americans are against it also.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right.
And to top it all off, the cherry on top, did you see the Ted Cruz video from 2016?
Yeah.
Where he said, we're liable to wake up one morning and Donald, if he were president, would have nuked Denmark. Oh my God. I didn't have Ted Cruz down as Nostradamus, in 2026. But like 2026 is wild. You know, Ted Cruz is making all kinds of wild predictions that are coming true. So
yeah, there's another Ted Cruz clip that has made the rounds, a more recent one, which just shows how far the Republican Party has moved, or perhaps maybe the shifting justifications over our foreign policy. I saw it highlighted by an Irish writer named Jason O'Mahony, and it's
Jason O'Mahony, I will have you know. No less.
Jason. Yeah, I got my typical Yank pronunciation there. My apologies to Jason and Irish listeners. But he quote tweeted a clip from Cruz where Cruz says that in the context of Greenland is saying basically that they should take the deal because, quote, to become an American is the greatest gift we can give anyone on planet Earth. And O'Mahony's quote tweet says quite accurately that there's a North Korean tone to this, where many Americans simply can't comprehend the idea that there are free nations whose citizens don't want or need to be American. I mean, it just really perfectly sums up why there's going to be such an impassable divide over Greenland here.
Does Ted Cruz know, like, there's, 100 other free nations in the world that have democracies? I wonder, is he aware of that, And
he is, and I'm sure he assumes that they all read their kids' stories at night at bedtime, Someday you'll get to be an American too, because...
Yeah, good grief, no. No,
I mean,
not.
In general, is that something that is kind of fully understood in Europe, how indoctrinated that idea of being, quote, the greatest country on earth is to Americans? Like that's widely believed here. If you remember when Obama took over, he questioned American exceptionalism in a speech and people went absolutely nuts. And what do you mean America is not exceptional? How can you be president of the United States if you don't believe America is exceptional?
America's not exceptional. I'm afraid.
Hey, come on now. We're losing 40% of our listeners, though.
Unfortunately, you have some of the lowest literacy rates in the world of the modern first world economies.
And as we discussed earlier this week, the worst life expectancy, terrible health outcomes.
Pretty bad.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about freedom.
Yes, freedom.
We just have more freedom than anybody else. That's the part you're missing.
Well, as we discovered, freedom won't give you healthcare either, will it?
We have the freedom to not have healthcare.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. That's exactly
how
it.
valuable that is.
I'm going to leave you with a quote there. J.D. Vance, and he keeps repeating this over and over, and he keeps saying Denmark hasn't done a good job at keeping Greenland safe.
Right. Right.
So I'm kind of wondering, out of curiosity, when was the last time somebody from Greenland was shot by the federal equivalent in Denmark?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point, certainly.
I'm pretty sure there's no federal agents there going around shooting Greenlanders in the face. I think masked federal agents shoot people in the face, It's quite grim. It's quite grim to watch this in the United States. I'm seeing prominent, people splitting hairs about whether it was murder or not murder. The fact of the matter is that a federal agent saw fit to shoot an unarmed woman 3 times in very questionable circumstances. Again, and I'm probably very guilty of hyperbole, and you don't see it over there, but the blinking red lights of fascism are just all over me by watching it.
The lights are definitely blinking red. He's given that opinion multiple times in a way that I think itself is pretty questionable. When you have a situation like this, I don't really care what your politics are or what your party is. The Vice President of the United States just should not be talking about this. The Vice President of the United States should not be publicly airing conclusions about this within, hours and then days after it happened. To your point about blinking red lights, I've said a few times in previous episodes about how polarized we are and talked about different things that show how polarized we are. I mean, this is now exhibit A completely in boldface that people are on both sides of the aisle are looking at literally the same videos and just coming to diametrically different conclusions and pretty extreme conclusions, right? It's either 100%, as Vance has said, this is clearly justified, or it's 100% murder. The idea of voices in the middle saying it's complicated, saying it's sad, even just saying that it's an outright tragedy are getting drowned out. You do wonder, at what point is this divide so entrenched that there's no removing it, there's no fixing it?
J.D. Vance said at a press conference during the week that ICE agents have absolute immunity. That
Right.
means they can never be prosecuted, is my reading of that. Yeah, that's pretty Orwellian.
Yeah, that seems to be what he said. There's been some pushback on that legally, and I admit to not being an expert there. But again, to the point about the vice president saying things, that's also something I prefer my vice president not say in public while those people are still out on the streets. It's not a seed that needs to be planted.
When you have the vice president, probably the most visible vice president since probably Dick Cheney or maybe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The second the man a heartbeat away from the presidency, as the old American saying goes, and he's up there saying ICE agents have absolute immunity. Like that's echoes of, Nazi Germany in the run up to World War II. I mean, if these guys can burst into your house with their masks on, detain you, internment essentially, and we know a bit about that because in Northern Ireland people have been snatched off the streets and put in prison. It is very fascist behaviour. And you can dress this up whatever way you want, and you might think from your side of the pond, and this is a fair, considering I don't have boots on the ground there, that maybe Europe is overblowing this a little bit. But I've been stepping back and taking a cold, hard look at this and trying to be as neutral as possible. And it does look very like fascism. I mean, Orban wouldn't dare do this in the EU, and he's probably the most authoritarian figure we have in the EU, and he wouldn't even dare do this.
Right. Being here, I'm still opposed to the definition of the administration's broader policy as fascist. But at the same time, it's hard not to see these little pockets that are moving in that direction. And one of the things I thought was interesting this week is that Joe Rogan, who's our biggest podcaster, big enough that I imagine most Irish listeners and European listeners have heard of him as well,
huge,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually came out and made that exact point this week. He said, we're asking for people's papers. What are we, the Gestapo? And that struck me as kind of fascinating and maybe a very, very tiny reason for a little bit of hope. In a very different way, it reminded me of a famous story in American politics, which is in the 50s and the 60s, we had a news anchor named Walter Cronkite.
Very famous over here in Europe, yeah.
Okay, right. And just the most respected, most honest man. If you ever see documentaries or something about the Kennedy assassination, they almost always show him delivering that news and starting a breakdown. And he went to Vietnam in early 1968, and he came back and gave a report where he said, basically that the war wasn't working. And the famous quote that he used was that the U.S. was, quote, mired in stalemate. And there was a story, which almost certainly is apocryphal, that Lyndon Johnson, the president of the time, saw that clip and said to someone in the room that, quote, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost middle America. Right. And again, the story is fake, but it's one of those apocryphal stories that keeps getting told because it got to a truth that if you lost Cronkite, that you lost middle America. Now, Joe Rogan is not Walter Cronkite.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I imagine that I am breaking new ground by making the comparison, but from a very high level, broad perspective, I do wonder if there's not a little bit of truth to that sense that if someone like Rogan, who has some pull and who someone on Substack a month ago or so called him America's most famous swing voter, some American liberals might disagree with that pretty vehemently. I think that's actually fairly accurate. That, to me, is just an interesting weather vane. If he's coming out going, this is too far, then you do wonder if the middle, which is what matters here, no one on the left or right is moving on this issue. Okay. No. I mean, you go on Twitter for 45 seconds, you figure that out. Where's the middle going to go? The fact that Rogan is going towards something which does suggest, I think, at least de-escalation, one tiny seed of hope. But
is there de-escalation going on in Minnesota at the moment?
No.
No,
and that's one of the that's one of the huge problems, and it's a problem with Greenland. It's a problem with ICE. Is that it's ironic that Trump has always pitched himself as the ultimate deal maker. He really can't make deals on any of these things in these second terms. For one, he's a lame duck, so him getting a deal doesn't really help that much for him personally or for his administration. It just looks like he's giving up power. Two, his base, is friggin' pedal to the metal, full throttle, whatever metaphor you want to use. They don't want him to de-escalate on any of these things. And third, they've used such extreme language. Even going back to his first term, his inauguration speech was called American Carnage, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
He can't really go, oh, we need Greenland to protect against China and Russia and then back down and get a deal. He can't have his supporters and and his spokespeople talk about, these violent immigrants who are rampaging across Minnesota and committing fraud and all this stuff, and then say, oh, yeah, well, we're going to change the methods ICE is using. And that's the one thing that does suggest some very real caution. It kind of adds to that sense of alarm that you have, is that because of how Trump is positioned being in his second term and because of how he and his administration speak, there isn't room for them to back down on any of this stuff in a way that a normal president might do. A normal president might make some kind of deal with local authorities, say, hey, we'll change these tactics, but you guys got to give us a little more free room to operate, or get the protesters out. Have your police help us when people are blocking operations, which we think are actually legal, et cetera, et cetera.
They haven't given themselves any off-ramps, have they? They're boxing themselves in diplomatically, domestically, internationally. They're leaving very little room for them to save face if things go against them. And they're not having many wins domestically. We know all the polling is showing this. So hence why he's probably focusing on Greenland a little bit. Mother Tree, killed by masked men.
Yeah, and without waging,
committing crimes,
I think you can debate whether she was technically committing a crime. That's part of the debate. But I do think at the very least, the fact that we're not able to just come together and say this is a tragedy is, it was not a violent crime.
No.
It's not a death penalty crime, obviously.
And Vance is again throwing fuel on the fire. I've been thinking about this a lot, and the people around Trump. And I think that Trump does not have the intelligence. And I'm a firm believer of this, that he's not a particularly bright fella. He's cunning, but cunning and intelligent are two different things.
Right.
Political cunning and political intelligence are two massively different things. I know loads of very, clever, intelligent politicians, but they wouldn't have the cunning of some other politicians, And I don't think Donald Trump has the intelligence to kind of play out the abstract scenarios that could happen from, going after Greenland or what's going on in Minnesota, or, throwing a hand grenade at the Fed with Jerome Powell.
Yeah.
So that was an extraordinary statement by Jerome Powell last Sunday evening, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. If you're not familiar, the Trump administration has said that they're investigating Powell for alleged perjury to Congress over the construction of a new headquarters. And Powell, he's the chair of the Federal Reserve. He was appointed by Trump during Trump's first term and then reappointed by Biden. His term as chair ends in May.
He's actually not a trained economist. He's actually a lawyer, would you believe? His career is rooted in politics and law as opposed to finance. I didn't know that, but the internet told me that. I was quite surprised I was quite surprised the Fed chair was a lawyer and a political expert as opposed to an economic one.
They have an entire economic staff and plenty of economic expertise elsewhere on the board and in the committee. That's right. But to oversimplify dramatically, the Fed is supposed to be independent and to set interest rates without political interference. Now, it's worth noting in the semi-defense of the Trump administration that Fed independence gets challenged all the time. We have a word, jawboning, which actually specifically refers to presidents, Democrat and Republican, who directly or indirectly criticize the Fed or ask for what they want. And one of the famous stories is that Lyndon Johnson shoved his Fed chair against a wall at his Texas ranch, according to reports. So, as is often the case with Trump, with Venezuela, we talked about how that was just an escalation of what American presidents typically have done. And this kind of feels the same way. But Powell came out very directly and said that they're investigating me to threaten the Fed's independence and because they want interest rates to be lower. And that's a noticeable change because he has spent both Trump terms basically tiptoeing around him and not challenging him at all and just sort of putting his head down. And for him to do that was an escalation for sure.
Yeah, what struck me was the timing of it, just with my politics hat on and my communications hat on, that they did it on a Sunday evening, and the language was quite heavy for what are essentially meant to be boring old economists.
Well, the language is legal, not economic. That's what jumped out to me, right?
Obviously, the whole of the Fed, all of the Fed is behind them because they kept this a secret and it didn't leak. It would have taken some time to put that together and a speech and everything else. And it didn't leak, so it seemed to indicate that he's the backing of everybody in the Fed.
And he also anyone in his position, but certainly he specifically, his personality, the way he's run the Fed, he also would have gone to the other governors to tell them what he was going to do. He is not by any stretch a guy who would just make that decision unilaterally. So to your point about it not leaking, yeah, they needed to write the speech and do the video and all that stuff. He also needed to go talk to a lot of people, any one of whom could have leaked what was going to happen. So I think that further supports your point.
Not only that, I think 8 of the main central banks from around Europe and the world actually wrote a letter. Did they wrote a letter in support of him, didn't they?
Central banks supported him. Past Treasury secretaries, Republican and Democrat, and past Fed chairs have publicly supported him. So certainly the institutions are on his side. But of course, if you're a Trump supporter, that only proves your point. It only proves Trump's point, right? That, this is just another creature of the swamp, and the other swamp creatures are rallying to his defense because, he wanted to spend $3 billion on a palace for the Fed.
So he got letters of support from Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Australia, South Korea, Brazil, and France, as well as the chair of the Bank of International Settlements. But,
all communists, though. They're all communists.
All massive communists. But do you know what central bank didn't sign the letter? Interestingly enough, I thought this was very interesting from a political point of view, a geopolitical point of view. The bank in Japan refused to sign the letter.
Interesting, yeah.
Whatever's going on, Japanese like to play 4D chess. They're thinking 5 or 10 years in advance.
One possibility is that the Bank of Japan does not want to irritate Trump any further because they're in the middle of pretty contentious negotiations where the U.S., it should be said, is doing a decent job of exercising its economic might.
Yeah, and I think they've called a snap election in Japan there recently, this week as well, haven't they? We're getting all around the world, Vince.
Yeah, I'll leave that to you. I'm an American. I have very little sense of any of that.
Yeah, I mean, your exposure to Europe is limited through me in Ireland, isn't it?
I know Guinness raised prices, so I am following the most important news developments in Ireland and on the continent. But that aside, yeah.
Well, yes, Guinness is the 5th time in 3 years, I think.
Wow, yeah.
And it's getting more expensive to go to just have a pint. I mean, 5 years ago, you get a pint for a $5 anywhere around Dublin. If you knew where to look. In most places now, it's €7 or €8 for a pint of Guinness. It's in the centre of Dublin. Diageo have announced its 5th price increase in just 3 years. Massive supranational alcohol conglomerate that bought Guinness a while back.
Right.
So they put it up by 7 cents, which is a weird number to put it up by, but ultimately, once you add in your VAT and your excise duty and everything else, the price of a pint of Guinness could go up by 40 cents. Wow. Not just 7 cents. Once you add in all your overheads and everything else, it could work out about 40, 50 cents a pint. So trying to get a decent, cheap pint of Guinness around Dublin has become nigh on impossible these days. You probably get a cheaper pint in, Chicago or New York, maybe.
Chicago, probably. New York, I would bet not so much.
Diageo are seen as money hungry, and this is a PR thing that's going to blow up in their face because people are actively searching for alternatives. And you can see it all over social media. They're talking about Beamish, made in Cork. So I fully approve of that. If anybody from Beamish is looking to sponsor us, Murphy's as well, also a good Cork drink. They're all stouts. I'll have to get you a pint of that when you're over, Vince. Get you off that nasty.
I've had Murphy's. It's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. Get you off that nasty Diageo Guinness. I mean, Diageo, what are they at? This is a PR thing gone mad. Ireland's synonymous with Guinness is free marketing, and they're actually killing the people who are, buying their drinks, buying their Guinness.
That's one of those issues that sort of just sticks in people's heads, like as sort of the avatar for overall inflation, right? I mean, if this payment goes up or this payment goes up, it's fine. But even from the outside, you can see something particularly galling about it being not just beer, which is supposed to be your kind of after work relaxation, but being Guinness, which, as you say, even, to outsiders is so obviously attached to Ireland in a way that certainly no American beer is. I mean, Budweiser is seen as American, but it's not something that we have the same level of national pride in.
Yeah.
Nobody's making, USA flags in the head of a Budweiser.
Yeah. Do they have Diageo much operations in the United States?
Yeah, yeah. They own all sorts of stuff. So they have like a tequila brand, which is fast growing here. George Clooney's brand, actually, Casamigos. They're all over the place. And I'm not sure if listeners know, they once owned Burger King, which is
What?
funny. Yeah.
Wait, Diageo owned Burger King?
Yeah, our giant fast food restaurant chain. I think they spun it off like 25 years ago.
Was it you could get a Burger King and a pint of Guinness or something?
Yeah, not in America.
That's your new Happy Meal, a new meal deal. That's a meal deal I could go for. A Burger King and a pint of Guinness, please. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's interesting to kind of see because their business really is not doing that well on a whole. So you do wonder if they're just kind of raising prices on Guinness because they're having to take prices down with a lot of their spirits because we've talked about this before. Alcohol consumption is down so much in developed countries, and that seems to be more in the spirits and more in the high-end spirits that they have, like these tequilas and stuff. So I'm guessing that they're probably trying to pump whatever they can out of Guinness because they need to offset lower profits and or higher marketing expense for some of the other brands that aren't doing nearly as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you know what the Guinness's second biggest market?
England? Britain?
Nigeria.
Oh, how about that? Wow.
Nigeria, yeah. I think it's second biggest market.
About that, yeah.
That's a strange, this useless fact for our listeners.
Rising tide of globalization comes for everything at some point.
Yes, eventually, even to Nigeria. Globalization and social media now go hand in hand, I think, Vince. And there's no better character that epitomizes this than Elon Musk. So,
he was in a little bit of hot water this week.
Over Grok,
in the United States and Europe,
over Grok, and, the images of women being undressed without their permission, child sex abuse images. He's in a lot of trouble. So come Sunday, we're going to go a deep dive into Musk. We're going to air all his dirty laundry. Hope you don't get sued. And hope you tune in to listen.
One of the most fascinating people in the world. I'm looking forward to that one.
I'm Tull from the Irish Politics Newsletter.
And I'm Vince Martin from Wall Street, Maine. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.